everybody, it's Travis with Lone Wolf Spiders, and for today's video I'm going to show you guys how I converted these storage containers into enclosures. Now I picked these up from my local grocery store, but I'll post a link in the description below where you guys can pick these containers up if you're interested in using some. What's really nice about these containers is they're really cheap. This one was only $1 and change, this one was only a couple of bucks. And what's really nice about these enclosures is the top lids are acrylic. So if you need extra ventilation, you can drill your holes into the top without compromising the lid. These lids secure really well, and I learned a little trick. If you take a little bit of water on your fingertip and run it around the edge of the lid, it's going to get an even tighter seal. I was able to get a really nice pattern into these because I got the idea from AGT Exotics. Go check his channel out. He's got a lot of really good videos on how to DIY enclosures. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Again, I want to give a shout out to AGT Exotics for coming up with this trick and using the grid paper to make sure that you get nice straight lines and evenly spaced holes. I came up with this kind of round design for the sides of the container, and then for the front and back I like to use just a straight row of holes just for a little bit of added ventilation. Now, again, what I like about these containers is the fact that the lid is acrylic, so it'll not only allows you to look down into the container, but it'll allow you to drill holes without compromising the strength of the lid. And using the grid paper, you can come up with any design that you want. It's only limited to your imagination, so go crazy. Now, when you're laying your stencil down, you can either hold it like I did, but just know you're at risk of bumping it or moving it. So you might end up with a hole somewhere you didn't want it, or your lines might not be straight. So if you don't want to do that, go ahead and tape it down, but I would use something like masking tape or painter's tape because the adhesive doesn't leave behind any residues like duct tape might. Also, to start our pre-pilot holes, I use a razor blade just because it's what I have on hand. But you can use something like an X-Acto knife or maybe even a pocket knife. You just want to make sure that whatever you're using is sharp. If you're using a dull blade for this process, you're going to have to apply a lot more pressure, which will put you at risk of cracking the acrylic. So in this step, you just want to apply a little bit of pressure and rotate your blade around a few times. All we're trying to do is create a little divot, a starter hole for our drill bit. You can skip this process if you want to, but if you use the drill bit just on the acrylic surface, you can be at risk of your drill bit walking or moving, which will cause you to put a scratch in it, or you can kind of miss your mark with your pilot, with your little stencil, with your starter holes. So I like to do these little pre-pilot holes just because it makes the whole process a lot easier. I get nice straight lines and evenly spaced holes. And take your time on this process and be careful because depending on what type of blade you're doing, you don't want to cut yourself. I like to go back and double check and make sure that all of my holes are lined up properly since I'm not using tape. So I just want to make sure that all of my holes are staying where they're supposed to. Now, for drilling the pilot holes, you want to start your bit off slow and then speed it up. Just like you can see me simulate here. Start slow and then go fast. Now, when you're drilling your holes, for me I wanted to use a 1/8 bit. You can use whatever size you want, but you don't want to start with your biggest bit. You want to start with something smaller, so I go with a 1/16. If you use the biggest bit and just start with that, you can crack the acrylic. We want to start small. We want to move minimal amounts at a time. So when you start this process, line your drill bit up inside the pre-pilot holes. Make sure your drill bit's just sitting perfectly inside those little divots. I use a cordless drill in this process, but you can use something like a Dremel tool if that's what you have. I like using the cordless drill because it's got weight to it, and I use that weight to my advantage. I allow the weight of the cordless drill to drive it through the acrylic. If you use a Dremel tool, you might have to apply a little bit of pressure, but not a lot. You don't have to be intimidated worrying about if you're going to get the right amount of pressure or cracking it. Now when you're drilling these holes, make sure you keep your blade or keep your drill bit vertical. You don't want to be at an angle. And again, start slow and then go fast. I start my drill bit spinning, and once I see it start to cut the acrylic, that's when I give it the go and give it all the power. If you cut slow all the way through it, you could risk cutting the acrylic. So that's why you need to have the speed. That's why it can be difficult using a Dremel, because a lot of them stay at a fixed speed the whole time. With the cordless drill, I feel that it gives you a little bit more margin for not missing or walking the bit out of your pilot hole. Now, just like before, when you put your drill bit in the chuck, make sure it's lined up straight. You don't want it to be at an angle because it'll create a wobble and you'll end up with some really wonky holes. So hit the trigger, make sure that your drill bit is even inside the chuck. Also, if you're using anything cordless, make sure that you've got extra batteries charged up. At any point, you don't want to lose your speed. If we go slow, we can crack the acrylic. So now that we're going on to our final holes, we're doing the exact same process as before. We're going to make sure that our bit is lined up evenly in our pilot hole, and we're going to start slow and go fast. So I'm doing the same thing. I start my bit off really slow, and once I start to see it cut the acrylic, that's when I speed it up. And again, I'm plunging straight in and straight out. I'm not reversing my drill bit. I wanted to pull all of that material out of those holes. So once you get all of your holes drilled out, you want to go and clean them all up. I was able to knock off all the burrs with my fingernails. There were a couple of trouble holes that I had to go back to with my razor blade, or if you have your X-Acto knife or your pocket knife, you can use that. You can use a rasp, or you can use a file to finally clean out your holes. Also, if you get any buildup inside the holes, you can run your drill bit back through it. Just don't run it at an angle, just go through slow, the hole's already drilled, and clear out the hole. And there you have it, guys. Nice clean holes.